A car with an unblemished record. One race, one win. The Brabham BT46B might have only had one outing, but the car's legacy has lived on to this day. How did it come to existence? Why was it so successful? And why did it never get that second outing? Today we look back at the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix. This is 70s Tales, Episode 2, Undefeated Innovation. Hello everyone and welcome. Today marks episode 2 of 70s Tales, where I look back at some of the most noteworthy races from the decade. Episode 1 reviewed the 1972 French Grand Prix, so do check that one out. But today we're focusing on Sweden 1978, the 6th and final GP held in the country. To provide some backstory, the 1978 season was going one way, that being the way of Lotus. The team that had so much success throughout the 1960s and early 1970s had hit something of a rough patch in the mid-1970s. 1975 saw them finish just 7th in the Constructors' Championships, their worst year ever at this point, and this was sandwiched by mediocre years in 1974 and 1976. The team needed something to get themselves back in the title hunt, and as is usually the case in Formula One, this was achieved through being at the forefront of innovation. If you're not winning the game, change the game. That's exactly what Colin Chapman and Lotus did in 1977. Chapman's RAF experience proved invaluable. Reviewing a de Havilland Mosquito fighter bomber, Chapman developed a 27-page document detailing how he believed a car could be developed within the regulations that had much increased downforce on anything ever seen before. This proved to be the catalyst to the ground effect revolution in F1, with all teams eventually putting their effort into cars with increased downforce. The good news for Lotus is that they were all playing catch-up. The Lotus 78 debuted at the start of the 1977 season and proved highly successful, finishing second in the Constructors' Championship with 5 wins along the way. The car was unbeatable on its day, but wasn't as consistent as Lotus might have liked. Fortunately for them, they were developing something even stronger in the background, whilst everyone else was scrambling around for ideas, trying to understand what Lotus had achieved in the first place. The Lotus 78 continued into the 1978 season, still proving highly competitive, before the team debuted the Lotus 79 at the Belgian Grand Prix. The other teams, presumably hoping for some niggling issues, were soon disappointed. Andretti stuck the car on pole by almost 0.8 of a second and won the race in the most comfortable of fashions. The next race was the Spanish Grand Prix, and this time both Andretti and his teammate Ronnie Peterson had the 79 at their disposal. The result was comprehensive. Andretti claimed pole, Peterson was second, and no one else was within a second of the pole time. The race followed suit, Andretti winning with ease, Peterson in second, and no one other than the Swede finishing within 30 seconds of the race winner. This brings us to the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix. Andretti and Peterson first and second in the championship, with the rest of the paddock asking the same question. How do we stop Lotus? Where nearly everyone else failed to come up with an answer, there was one man who did. Gordon Murray, chief designer of the Brabham team. Whereas other designers could not initially contemplate how the Lotus was achieving these high levels of downforce, Murray was able to understand what the team was doing. Understanding is one thing, but acting upon that understanding is another thing entirely. Unfortunately for Murray, that was the tricky bit. A big reason Lotus had found such success was due to the Venturi tunnels featured on the Lotus 79, a solution that worked well due to the small, compact V6 Cosworth engine they used. Brabham did not use a V6 Cosworth engine, instead being powered by a wide Alfa Romeo flat 12 engine. This was a massive disadvantage. Without the Venturi tunnels, Brabham would not be able to gain the same aerodynamic effect that Lotus were getting. Murray realised this, and rather than chase Lotus down with something that was never going to catch up, he went down a completely different path, with the BT46B, also known as the fan car. The fan car is, essentially, what it says on the tin. It was a car with a massive fan on the back. Extracting air from underneath the car, it was believed the downforce generated would be a match for the Lotus, if not an improvement in that respect. It was undoubtedly an incredible feat of innovation, but there were more than a few questions surrounding its legality. Without going too deep into the rulebook here, the benefits of the fan were twofold. Firstly, as mentioned, the suction beneath the car massively increased downforce, and secondly, the fan drew air from the radiator to cool the engine. The legality of the car depended entirely on which was the primary function. If it was to increase downforce, the fan had to be classed as an aerodynamic device and did not comply with the rules. If it was to cool the engine, this was perfectly legal. Unsurprisingly, Brabham advocated the latter, whereas the protesting teams said it was the former. The protests were turned down by organisers before the race, and the Brabham team of Niki Lauda and John Watson were allowed to run the car, although the FIA were to look into this post-race. The team refined the system through practice, meaning Andretti and Peterson maintained their advantage for much of Friday and Saturday's running, but at the end of the third practice session, the Brabham guys showed up. Whilst they couldn't wrestle pole away from Andretti, they did split the Lotus drivers, with Watson starting second, Lauda third, with Peterson in fourth. The start of the race saw a good start for one driver from each team, and a bad start for a driver from each team. Andretti and Lauda got away cleanly, with the Lotus leading early on, but Watson and Peterson did not get away so well. Peterson suffered an early puncture, whereas Watson endured a slow start before retiring from the race on lap 20. Out front, Andretti held the lead, but unlike the previous two races in Belgium and Spain, it was far from comfortable. Lauda stuck to the back of the Lotus, waiting for a mistake, and he was eventually rewarded for his tenacity. Andretti making an error on lap 38 of 70 and allowing Lauda through in the process. Things went from bad to worse for Andretti as he retired just 8 laps later. Lauda went on to cruise to victory by over 30 seconds back to second-placed man Riccardo Patrese in his Arrows. This despite Lauda not wanting to demonstrate how good the Brabham really was. Peterson enjoyed a fight back through the field to third after being as low as 17th after his early puncture. The BT46B had won on debut in clinical fashion, although to no one's surprise this wasn't the end of proceedings. The FIA investigated the car and agreed with Brabham in that the fan's primary purpose was focused on cooling, not aerodynamic performance, thus declaring the car legal. It's a common misconception that the FIA did this with the caveat that the car could not race again. However, this is untrue. The FIA declared the car legal for the rest of the season. So why did a car that had a 100% win rate never race again despite a positive ruling on its legality? This is where Brabham team owner Bernie Ecclestone enters the story. As well as running Brabham, Ecclestone had just become the president of the Formula One Constructors Association. The war between FOCA and FISA, the sport's governing body, could get an episode in its own right. But the most important thing to note here is that Ecclestone needed the support of the constructors included in FOCA in his quest to gain more power in F1. Unfortunately for Ecclestone, members of FOCA, led by Colin Chapman of Lotus, threatened to remove their support for Ecclestone if Brabham continued to run the fan car. A compromise was initially reached, stating that Brabham would run the car for 3 more races before retiring it. The agreement was soon nullified though, as the Commission Sportive Internationale, FISA's predecessor, intervened and declared the car illegal, although the result in Sweden would still stand. And there you have it, the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix and all the events that unfolded prior and after the event. The 1970s has become well known for how much the sport changed in a short period of time, and a large factor in that were supreme individuals such as Chapman and Murray pushing each other as well as the regulations. I'll be back next time with another tale from the 70s. If you enjoyed the video, please do leave a like and subscribe for more of the series and other content that we bring you here on the channel. Thank you ever so much for watching, and remember, keep breaking late.